Well, to me, being poet in residence is an honour, but it's also a responsibility, and poet in residence at Poetry Ireland is a responsibility to the people of Dublin and especially to the North Inner City. There's poetry in all of us, and I think it's just a matter of being ready to tap into that.
So David, thanks for coming in. It's an absolute pleasure. It's been so long.
So the way that Poetry Prompts worked was every morning I would put out on Facebook and on Twitter a word that was illustrated by a photograph for adults and also a word that was illustrated by a children's drawing for children. The response to the prompts was really incredible. People were so productive and prolific with their poems in those early days of the lockdown.
Catherine Ann started these prompts and suddenly it formed a community. You know, in these days where we were being socially distanced, suddenly there was a reason to connect and to reach out. And a lot of the poetry prompts I interpreted as being my return. You know, I was living in a cottage that used to be the cottage of my great-grandparents. Every evening then when I'd come in and sit down to write what the prompt was, it got tied into the origins of who I was, where I came from, how it begun, how these roots, how these gardens were growing up around me and what my connection was to them, having been away for 23 years. Even the petal must rise above the thorn before it can dance in the light. Eat the storms, mother said, but I didn't hear it at first. It takes time to swallow the truth and teach the tongue to taste the rain.
The ABCDublin project came out of the prompts in a way. It was an alphabet project, and I would tweet out little poems myself, little rhyming couplets about something in the city beginning with A, and then people would come back with their ideas of what to write for the alphabet of the city.
The ABCDublin project kept me sane. It started literally the first day of lockdown, and when everything fell apart, I suddenly had something to do. Because I decided to do haikus, I kind of just wrote them on my phone. It's important for me to express myself through poetry just because that's how my brain works, it's how I get ideas out of me and sort of understand myself a little better. I think Dublin helps me engage with poetry because the poetry is the constant, but Dublin has ended up as the muse. A. Abbey Street. The clang of a Lewis pulling up, the tang of metal. B. Crossing a bridge with the rush of life underneath. It's overwhelming.
The wonderful thing about the Fatima project is that the Fatima group came to me. They had heard that there was a poet in residence at Poetry Ireland working in the communities, and they were wondering if I would do some workshops with them on Zoom. When somebody comes to you looking for poetry, you know that they're thirsty for poetry and that you can satisfy their thirst and encourage them. It's been a wonderful group to work with.
So I'm a community worker with Fatima Groups United, and it's our role to facilitate arts and cultural programs for everybody who walks in the door. It's been a new experience to actually have the time and space to actually think about words and to write poems. We are discovering that our voices can be heard in the poetry tradition here in Ireland, and that's important. Voice. Voices from the flats, bin chute clattering, milk bottles on balconies shattering, cold icy winds, warm mugs of tea, cups of sugar borrowed, a fiver till Wednesday, Guinness aroma wafting through the Fatima air, memories of sepia photographs hung on a paisley wall, footprints on the stairwell, hands that held you tightly, remembering the voices from the flats.
One of the groups that I worked with in the beginning of my residency was the Pathways group. Now this is an education and a drop-in centre for prisoners who are transitioning back into the community and even prisoners who've been released for a while. And one of the things that was lovely about having them here was that they were coming from very dark places, both mentally and physically. Prisons are very dark. They don't have a lot of light in them. And so the idea of them coming into the beautiful bright rooms here in Poetry Ireland was really lovely for them, and they really appreciated it a lot.
We met every Wednesday morning to do a poetry workshop with Catherine Ann Cullen in Poetry Ireland. It created a tribe-like situation for the students. We bonded as a group, walking to Poetry Ireland. Most of these men have been traumatised really for most of their lives, incarcerated in different prisons, and Catherine Ann was so gifted in her approach. She had a very gentle presence and a very warm presence, and prisoners felt comfortable immediately in that environment. They had a great interest in expressing themselves on paper, and she managed to evoke that response really.
So the main purpose of the Artists in Residence was in order for Poetry Ireland to ensure that we had an artist at the very core, at the centre of all of our activities. Catherine Ann has focused on breaking down real barriers, and she's built trust and a sense of pride in people, in their own creativity, in finding their own voice. And that has been hugely successful. We've had thousands of people engage in her programme.
It's been wonderful to be part of the Poetry Ireland team. I've been very blessed to have such a supportive team who are always interested in any new ideas, and I've always had an interest myself in poetry and song and those connections, and I've really kind of enhanced those a lot during the residency. I just think linking poetry and song with communities is really something that I want to continue doing.